as Nick indicated, I live out west now and have worked. I do a lot of work, yes, in dry country. Where we live, our average annual precipitation is between 7 and 8 inches. It's high desert country, but we also have the magic of, or we did. I moved off the ranch 2 years ago after 40 years of daily chores and everything. I don't do any of that anymore, but I haven't forgot everything that I learned while I was doing it. Our primary, grazing out there was center pivot irrigation, and it might shock you if I say, Missouri, where we lived in Missouri, it was 38, 40 inch annual precipitation. So similar to some parts of Virginia, wetter than others, drier than others, I guess. But it doesn't really matter whether you're in a high natural rainfall environment like this, irrigating, or out on desert rangeland. The basic principles are all the same. When you have water, things happen fast. When you don't have water, things happen slow. But the same things are happening. I'm going to talk on 2 topics this morning, and then this afternoon we're going to go wander around in the pastures on the farm there. I'm going to start with this concept: why managing time is more important than just managing space. And then we'll do this, we'll take a short break, and then I'm going to talk about grazing management for targeted animal performance after we have that break. And we will spend a bit of time in that, talking specifically about grass-fed beef and what it takes to produce a high-quality product there. And I forgot to bring my remote, so I'm going to actually have to hang out here and push the buttons. So we're going to start from a very simple point. You're going to do that? All right. He's insisting, so I might try to just remember to say, next slide, please. No, not yet. Not yet, not yet. But I'll try to remember to say that at the appropriate time. Yes, sir?
Is it all right to record this?
Yeah. Yeah. You just have to pay me royalties.
We're also recording back there, and we'll share the finished recording with everyone.
Okay, so we're going to start from a very basic point, and that's the concept of stocking rate. Now, this is the way we typically define stocking rate: the number of animals or animal live weight assigned to a grazing unit on a seasonal basis. The way we really need to think about it is that is our demand. Grazing is a supply and demand relationship. The land out here supplies something, the animals demand it as they graze it. So stocking rate is how much demand we're putting on the land. Next slide, please. When I went to school in the 1970s, we were pretty well taught that stocking rate is the only thing that matters. And so stocking rate theory is put the appropriate number of animals on a defined space and leave it there until it is gone? No, that's not what they taught us. What they taught us was put the appropriate number of animals on a defined space and leave them until it is grazed to an appropriate residual. Graze to this, not to that, but almost every one of your neighbors forgot that piece about grazing to an appropriate residual, and this is where it ends up. You leave them there until it's gone. And the pasture and range scientists tell us that's the best we can do. Slide. Yeah, rather than saying slide, please, I'll try to do this. All right, this is where stocking rate theory really has gotten us. Simply to the point of land degradation and broke farmers and ranchers. And so this is what I see as the problem we have on most of our grazing lands in this country. and I'll say around the world, because there's only one, Africa is the only continent that I haven't gone to and worked on. Whether we want to talk about South America, Australia, Central Asia, Europe, this is the same problem we see everywhere. A defined space with undefined time. Here's an illustration of stocking rate. We have 10 animals. We've put them on 10 acres. We can say, oh, the stocking rate is 1 head per acre. And you know, I can look at these pictures and I know that's a cow. So I could say we have a cow per acre. Now we really know something, don't we? Well, is it a 900-pound cow, a 1,200-pound cow, a 1,500-pound cow? What exactly is it? So we can also express stocking rate as pounds of animal live weight. And that's the way I prefer to think about it, not as so many head per acre or so many acres per cow, but as how many pounds of animals. And it doesn't really matter whether they're sheep, goats, yearlings, cows, or what, because ruminant animals eat in proportion to their body weight. And so if we know the weight of the animal or animals that are out there, we can very easily predict what they're going to eat. So why, yeah, you can add another one. Why is stocking rate important? Overall, it's a primary determinant of profitability because it defines what your revenue stream is going to be. You know, in general, the more animals you have, the greater the revenue stream is going to be. Now, revenue is not profit. It's only one side of the profit equation. It's also a primary determinant of individual animal performance, especially if optimal carrying capacity is exceeded. And remember, carrying capacity is the productivity of the land. It is the supply side of the equation. This is the general relationship. As we increase stocking rate, individual animal performance declines. As we increase stocking rate, production per acre increases, but only up to a point. And we illustrate that relationship with something that's called the Mott curves, because Gerald Mott, who was a prominent American pasture researcher from the 1940s to the 1990s, roughly, he drew this out. And here we have increasing stocking rate. Here we have increasing performance. Think about both animal performance and land performance. So we have 10 acres out here, and we put one steer on it. That steer, he can go and pick the very best bite, take big bites, and he's going to do very well, right? We can put 2 steers out there, and there's enough space for both of them. They're both going to do well. But at some point, we're going to put enough steers out there that they're going to start competing for feed. They can't all take the biggest, best bite, and individual performance starts to go down. And eventually it goes down very quickly. Now, at the start of this, I said when we had 1 steer and then added 2 steer and they both did well, as long as you can add 1 animal to the system and it doesn't affect or add another animal to the system and it doesn't affect the performance of the first animal, this gain per acre is going to increase linearly. Once individual performance starts to fall off, though, the rate of increase in gain per acre starts to slow down. Mott said, where those lines intersect is the optimum stocking rate. Mott was wrong, and Mott died because he was wrong. He was at one of the, the national meetings, American Society of Agronomy, and giving the same presentation he'd been given for 40 years. And a younger researcher pointed out to him that he was wrong. And he got so upset, he died of a heart attack there on the stage. I was not the guy who killed Mott, but I'm doing the best to kill his idea. And I'll tell you why. Because you take the typical farmer ranch that's running a cow herd, and if you list out land-based assets and livestock-based assets. So what are land-based assets? Well, the land itself, the fence we put around it, the grass seed we planted on it, the fertilizer we put on it, the fence we built to subdivide it, the stock water ponds that we put out there. Oh, and we own equipment. How many of you have mowed a cow, or plowed a cow, or baled a cow? All of that equipment we have is mostly used to do stuff on the land. We own some livestock. We got a pickup and a stock trailer. We got a cattle scale. We got some corrals. Think about whether this asset is animal-based or land-based, and what you will find is, on average, you have 5 to 6 times more invested in land and tools that we use on the land compared to what the livestock is. Most of the unprofitability in the cow-calf business and other livestock business is because ranchers mistakenly think they're in the livestock business when they're really in the land management business. Mott said this is the point of optimum stocking rate because he wasn't thinking about economics. Approximately there is the economic optimum. That is where profitability is maximized. And is it more important to maximize individual animal performance or profitability? And by far, it's more important to, and not necessarily maximize, but work towards that maximum point of profitability. And the reason it's over here is because all we have invested in these land-based assets. We want to maximize our return to the land-based assets, not to the livestock assets. And this might be a little more than you were expecting to start your morning with, but this is one of the biggest keys to moving from unprofitable cattle operations to profitable cattle operations. Understand that it is return to the land that matters more than return to the animals, okay? So, did we advance one? Okay. So we talked about stocking rate as being the demand that we put on the land. Carrying capacity is the supply that we have out there. The way we increase return to the land most effectively is by increasing carrying capacity. Now, there's the demand, there's the supply. You know, when I have someone, you know, doing this for me, sometimes I forget, you know, that these slides come up incrementally, and every time I want a new line to show up, I gotta do that. All right, so carrying capacity, the upper limit of it is set by the environment in which you live. And that is largely based on the amount of rainfall, but also the length of the growing season, soil type, past management history. But the overriding factor in the productivity of every different farm out here is how much rain do you get. That's what limits the top end of carrying capacity. It is your grazing management that determines of that potential how much do you actually harvest. These two pictures here, they're 5 miles apart. This is the ranch unit that I managed for 18 years in Idaho. This is the neighbor. And by the way, you'll notice I'm not going to say anything bad about anybody in this room, but I will talk down on your neighbors. All right, so that's a very different picture. They're both sprinkler irrigated. We have the first water right out of Patterson Creek. They have the first water right out of Falls Creek. Soil type is the same under here. They should be producing essentially the same, but they are not. The neighbors, because I spy on them, you know, I can count how many animals they have. I can measure on Google Earth what the area of their pasture is. I can record the date that the animals went out there and when they started feeding hay, and I can do the service of calculating for them what their production is. And it's nice that I do that because I'll guarantee you they actually don't know. AUD, I'm from the West, so you've got to bear with me. Animal unit days per acre. That is our measure of grazing yield. All an animal unit day is, when you get right down to it, is 26 pounds of dry matter forage. A standard animal unit is a 1,000-pound animal. The animal unit day is what that animal eats at a moderate level of performance. So it's 2.6% of body weight. So just look at, they got little numbers, we got big numbers. Is basically what it comes down to. That's what the neighbor's pasture looks like at the end of the season. You know what our pasture looks like at the end of the season? Snow cover. Yeah, because we graze months later than they do, till, you know, it's all gone under the snow. But 120 to 150 AUDs per acre, 240 to 250. Best year I ever had on this place was 318 AUDs per acre, you know, which is, and I used to, in that very year when I hit that number, I believed that it was because I was the best grazing manager there was. As it turns out, what I learned from, you know, my 84-year-old neighbor is that it was just the best year he'd ever seen in his life. So that's when sometimes the environment allows you to harvest more than what it historically does. But they are overstocked, and as a matter of fact, this property does not look like this anymore. You know why? Because they went broke and they had to sell it. And they sold it to one of the few other people around who manage more similar to what we do than what they did, and now it looks pretty much like ours. Actually, if you stood in this pasture and looked that direction, you'd be looking at that mountain right there. All right. So we have these terms, overstocking and overgrazing. And some people use them interchangeably, but they're actually two very different things. Overstocking is having more animals than the resource will bear. My neighbor in the previous pictures, their problem was they were overstocked. They just had way too many animals than what that, you know, pasture area could support. So it got chewed down, you know, very quickly. Their productivity was very low. Now, overstocking, it's a farm-wide problem, and the only way you correct it cost-effectively is by reducing numbers. Overgrazing is a very different thing. Now, overstocking will result in overgrazing, but very often we see overgrazing taking place on understocked farms. This is allowing animals to bite a plant that is in a negative carbohydrate balance. And you say, oh gosh, what's a negative carbohydrate balance? This guy's throwing cans at me. He's so, you know, upset about, he didn't want to hear this stuff. All right, so a negative carbohydrate balance. Think about a plant in the spring of the year and it's just starting its new growth. Where does the energy for that first growth of the spring come from? People will say from carbohydrate reserves, from the roots there. It comes from stored energy, because you only have photosynthesis working when you have green leaves above ground, right? So that initial growth comes from stored energy. There is more energy flowing upward in the plant than there is downward. And man, this is confusing because you would think a negative would be something going down. But when we talk about a negative carbohydrate balance, it means the plant is drawing on root reserves, and so there's more energy flow upward into the plant than there is downward. Now, the plants grow, and we get a certain volume of leaves out there, and photosynthesis is going on, and there comes a point at which energy flow reverses. We now have enough photosynthesis happening to support new growth and restore those carbohydrates to the roots and other storage organisms. That is a positive carbohydrate balance. There's more energy flow downward in the plant. Next slide, please. All right, there's two ways that overgrazing takes place. We stay too long on the same pasture, and the animals keep biting off that new growth that's now coming from stored energy, and so it's depleting the plant's energy, negative carbohydrate balance. We could have taken animals away from a pasture, allowed it to recover some. We have some nice bright green grass, and we get excited about it, and we put the cattle back on there, but it was too short of a recovery period. And they're biting off growth that primarily came from stored energy, hasn't let it come far enough that photosynthesis is recharging the storage organs, and we're in a negative carbohydrate balance again. Notice, staying too long, coming back too soon, those are both functions of time. It isn't the number of animals that you have out there that's the problem. It is the failure to effectively manage time. What was the title of this talk when we started? Why managing time matters more than space. Overgrazing is really a product of ineffective time management. We had stocking rate defined here. Now we're going to talk about stock density. If you go to any of these adaptive grazing meetings or regenerative grazing meetings, you hear people talk about stock density, you got to raise your stock density, you got to increase your stock density. So what the heck is stock density? The number of animals or animal live weight assigned to a specific pasture area at a specific point in time. All right, so continuous grazing, or set stocking as call it in the academic community, but in the farmer community, usually we just say continuous grazing. Again, going back to the 70s when I was in school, I never heard any of my professors use the word stock density. I never read it in a textbook in the 1970s of stock density. And you know why? Because everything they taught was set stocking, and in continuous grazing, stocking rate and stock density are the same thing, because on any given day, any one of these animals can be at any spot in this pasture. So stock density is not a relevant term in set stocking. It's when we start splitting up a pasture that it becomes an important concept. So we've taken this 10 acres and we've split it down into 4 quarters, 2.5 acres each, and we've put all 10 animals on there. So our the stocking rate hasn't changed, has it? We still have 10 animals on this 10 acres. But now they're concentrated in an area, and the stock density has gone from 1,200 pounds per acre to 4,800 pounds per acre. Does that make any real difference? Not a whole lot. It's not going to change your carrying capacity. It's probably not going to change individual animal performance very much. What it's going to do is allow your plants to be healthier and maybe a little more productive. Maintain a little diversity. Now let's split it again. Now we have 10 1-acre pastures. Well, guess what? If we have 10 animals on 1 acre, they're probably going to have to move sooner than when we had them on 2.5 acres. So we are shortening the amount of time there is in each of these spaces. Because now we are beginning to manage time, some things are happening. We're grazing more uniformly and effectively. We're allowing longer recovery periods because we now see in the previous picture, if you think about recovery period, 25% of the time a pasture area is being grazed, 75% of the time it's in recovery. Here, oh, he's getting carried away. He's trying to read my mind. All right. So now, with them concentrated on only 10% of the acreages, that pasture, once they move off of there, 90% of the time it's in recovery. And if you are in recovery for 90% instead of just 75%, you're going to grow more feed. And if you grow more feed, what can you do? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. With that change in management and stock density, we have actually increased the productivity of pasture by maybe 20%. So we're running 20% more animals, which means we have 20% more revenue. Now, didn't I say as we increase stocking rate, individual animal performance will go down? Well, it doesn't just at the instant you add another animal automatically means that it's going down. It's that whole, well, it depends on how you're managing the grazing, whether or not individual performance is going to stay the same, go down, or possibly even increase. Now we have 20 1/2 acre pastures. Recovery is now at 95% of the time, which is going to tweak our productivity a little bit more. But some of the things that happen when we go to this even more concentrated stock density is our manure distribution is becoming more even. So it's a better fertilization program than when the animals were scattered. They're eating almost any weed that is out there. Now, if you got poisonous weeds, that's not a good idea. But if they're weeds that they just don't eat and they're unsightly but not toxic, it's a good thing if they eat those weeds. And so this is basically, we have moved from a defined space with undefined time to managing based on a defined time with flexible space. Sometimes they need a bigger space because it's not growing as much. Sometimes they need a smaller space because it's growing very fast. So I started moving our cattle. Actually, I started moving sheep on a daily basis first in 1988. And by the end of that year, because that was a very bad drought year, I was moving cattle on a daily basis also. And it worked so well in that drought year, I basically never went back. And so since 1988, I've pretty well been move them every day person. Do I ever leave them longer than that? Oh yeah, sure. If I'm going to go away for a while, I'm going to leave them there longer. I just give them a bigger space. Do I ever move them more than once a day? Yes, sometimes I do, if I have a specific objective that I'm trying to accomplish. Almost every objective we have in grazing, we accomplish it more effectively if we have shortened the time that we're allowing the animals to be there. And we're going to come pretty soon to why that's so important. Just to give you perspective, that is that's 500 cow-calf pairs on about 3 acres, and they're there for 24 hours. That's on a daily move, that's about as high a stock density as I will get to. If you're moving multiple times a day, that concentration becomes even greater. But visually, that's what 500 head on 3 acres, or 500 pairs, so 1,000 animals on 3 acres looks like. All right, so as we make the grazing allotment smaller, stock density increases. That's pretty obvious. We also reduce the time of occupancy. The big effect is if we concentrate animals for a shorter period of time, we deliver more impact on the pasture. Stock density, the reason stock density is such a powerful tool in grazing management is because it's actually a function of time. Managing time is the most critical component of successful grazing management. And this is what our industry has largely been missing for my entire life and a generation or two before me. So this is surely something we just discovered. I don't have the slides in this presentation. James Anderson in Scotland wrote this out entirely, everything I've talked about thus far, in 1777. André Voisin wrote it all out in the 1940s. Alan Savory copied out of Voisin's book his holistic management, and he did that in the 1980s. None of this is new. We just haven't been doing it.
For your management, do you have a specific pounds per acre that you're trying to achieve for a daily move?
Okay, the question is, do I have a specific poundage of livestock that I want to have to accomplish the daily move? The answer is, of course, it depends. What does it depend on? Well, how much feed is out there per acre? I cannot run the same stock density for 24 hours if the grass is this tall compared to if the grass is this tall. If the grass is this tall, I'm going to shrink the area, not expand the time. And historically, in our industry, what people have done is they've expanded the time. Well, I'll leave those animals out there longer to clean it up. And what you get when you leave animals out there longer to clean it up is more severe grazing on the desired spots, minimal additional grazing on the unpalatable stuff. If, however, we approach it from the outset, that we're going to put the animal concentration there that will get them to eat all that in a single day, that's what we're working towards. But so the answer is no, there is not a specific poundage that this is built around. It is very much you put in the stock density that is appropriate for the amount of feed that's out there, how much of that you want to utilize in this grazing event, what do the individual animals need to eat to achieve the target level of performance, and what's the time frame you're going to do this in. And for me, about the only time frame that is, or the only one of those 4 parameters that is fixed is the time's going to be a day with a little bit of flexibility. You know, so the solution to almost every problem that comes up is, well, move them every day. If you want to get away from the flies, well, move them every day. If you don't want them re-ingesting, you know, parasites, larvae, move them every day. All right, so these next few slides are, to me, the best explanation of why it's important to have short grazing periods. When we talk about a grazing cycle involves 2 time periods, the grazing period and the recovery period. Grazing period is when the animals are actually on that part of the pasture utilizing it. Recovery period is when the animals are not there and the plants are growing undisturbed. So we have these 2 time periods. if we think about the grazing period, mostly negative things are happening to the plants and the soil. Because photosynthesis takes place in the leaves, and the most desirable part of the plant for animals to graze is the leaves. As soon as we put them into the pasture and they start grazing leaves, photosynthesis is being diminished. If we are reducing photosynthesis on the top of the plant, we're restricting energy flow to the roots, and so we have to slough some of the roots off, which in the long term is a good thing, because that's how we build organic matter deep in the profile. But in the short term, it's not a good thing because it slows potential recovery. Now, this direct energy flow to the soil is reduced. This is the ongoing relationship between higher plants and all the microbial populations down there. The fastest growing part of soil science over the last 2 decades has been soil biology. The whole soil health movement is built from really new knowledge that we are gaining. I shouldn't say the whole. What has stimulated this surge in interest in soil health is what we have learned in the last 20 years about soil biology. And I don't think there's a slide in here to illustrate it, but we've always known that the top of the plant feeds the bottom of the plant, right? And we know that microbes decompose dead plants. You know, we've known that for a long time. What we haven't known is how much energy on a daily basis from ongoing photosynthesis is actually flowing through the plant to the roots, exuding in the soil to feed microbes to support the symbiotic relationship between microbes and higher plants. And the current research suggests that within 48 hours of a sugar molecule being created from photosynthesis, 30 to 60% of that energy creation has already flowed through the plants to the soil to feed the microbial populations. That's this direct energy. Well, if we take photosynthesis away, we quit feeding microbes in the rhizosphere. And then another negative thing that can happen, and the only way you're going to get soil compaction to occur in a pasture is how? By having animals out there stepping on it. So soil compaction can only occur during the grazing period. There is a positive that we can point to in the grazing period. This is when our fertilization takes place. Dung and urine are returning minerals that were taken up by plants, returning it back to the soil. Nitrogen and sulfur in urine within minutes of hitting the soil are available for plant uptake. So cow urine, sheep urine, any grazing animal that's urinating on the ground is a direct and immediate fertilization of that ground. And then feces are going to be more slowly released. So if we think about, you make the grazing periods shorter, that is fewer days during the growing season that negative things are happening. And that's a good thing. The shorter you make the grazing period, the sooner we can get into the recovery period. And we'll see why that's important. All right, now, when you increase stock density, you are not increasing stocking rate of the land. Not at that instant. If one day you graze at 30,000 pound stock density and the next day you graze at 100,000 pound with the same herd, you have not changed the daily feed requirement of that herd. What you have changed is the impact, positive and mostly positive impacts, that you're delivering on the land. That's what increasing stock density does. I suspect most of you are familiar with broom sedge. Yeah? Not a very popular plant, completely useless, unpalatable, all that, right? It's a scourge on the landscape. Animals will never eat it. Right, okay, here we go. All right, so this was on a place down in the Missouri Ozarks that our oldest son was managing 12 to 15 years ago. Broom sedge, and you can tell this is either fall or winter. So we have a lot of broom sedge there, but we have fescue grown up in it as a stockpile. So he had about 600 cows in this herd. This is where they were yesterday. Yesterday morning, that there looked just like this. They were there for 24 hours. They're now back in this broom sedge patch. Tomorrow, they'll be over here. And at the end of this grazing flow, it's all going to look like this. Why don't cows eat broom sedge in a set stock situation? There's no protein. You know, in the broom sedge plant itself, at this point, we probably have 2 to 3% crude protein. A dry, pregnant beef cow has a protein requirement of about 6.5 to 7%. So they can't eat broom sedge because they can't digest it, because there's no protein. And in a set stock situation, they're going to go through and they're going to eat all the fescue out of it and leave you the broom sedge untouched. But if you concentrate them, put them at a high stock density, so 600 cows on 8 acres is what, 75 cows per acre for 24 hours. Now they take the bite of fescue right along with the bite of broom sedge. Fescue is high in protein, and because the rumen is a big mixing vat, the protein that's being supplied by the fescue, the rumen microbes use that protein to digest the fiber of the broom sedge. This, what I described, or you don't have to back me up, but that picture where I asked the question, it's a useless plant, right? That is based totally on spatial management mentality. Change to a time management mentality, and you figure out, oh, I can get them to eat this, and it's no longer wasted solar energy. All right, this is going to be a, out of the neighborhood example, but I'll point it out. So I started working with this ranch in 2005, and they had this winter range unit, and typically they could put about 450 cows out there, go 6 weeks, but then the cows would be falling off condition-wise, and they'd need to start feeding. And
You ready?
oh, I wasn't quite, because I wanted to point out.
Trying to go back.
Okay, there. So what their harvest was, at that set stocked, spatial-based management was only 7.2 animal unit days per acre. Strip grazing it, 900 cows put onto 6 acres for 24 hours. There's where they are today. Here's where they'll go tomorrow. What did we harvest there? 29 animal unit days per acre. 400% increase in carrying capacity when they changed from spatial management to time management. Increased to 900 cows for 85 days rather than 450 cows for 42 days. That's a lot of money saved. In the year of 2000, the winter of 2006, 2007, I can tell you exactly what the cost savings was on that ranch because they changed grazing management. It was $36,000. The fence and stock water system, not the stock water system, the fence that was put in place to take, and this was almost 2,500 acres, that was one big pasture. We fenced it into 16 pastures, roughly 160 acres. And the cost for the fence was just over $33,000. Their cost savings that winter was $36,000. 1 year's feed cost savings paid for that entire fence system. The water, okay, it took 2 years to pay for the water. But in 3 years' time, they invested $105,000 into that 2,500 acres to accomplish that. And that's a big number. That's a scary number, right? $105,000 for fence and water? Divided by 2,500 acres. It's $40 an acre. And they quadrupled what they were harvesting from it. What else can you do for $40 an acre that would give you that kind of response? All right, so why do we want to get to the recovery period? Because mostly positive things happen in the recovery period. We're allowing leaves to regrow, so photosynthesis is increasing. We're feeding the root system again. We're expanding the root system. We're flowing energy to the microbes, so they're giving us all those services that they provide. Nutrients being released from the feces, and I didn't put it in here, but also because we have biological activity happening again, we are decompacting the soil. So we make grazing periods short to minimize the number of days that bad things are happening to the pasture. We make recovery periods longer, so we have more days of the year that good things are happening. That's how simple, this relationship is. Now, we are the ones who set the length of the recovery period. And some people get so wrapped up in recovery period, they actually make them too long. Most people, the problem is the recovery periods are too short, but they can also become too long, and we have some negative effects out of that. So it's up to you to figure out what is the appropriate for your environment, for your use, what is the appropriate length of recovery. There is not a magic number.
So what are some of the negative effects by going too long, like trees and shrubs growing?
Okay, so the question is, what are some of the negative effects? And said, like tree and shrubs? Yeah, woody encroachment is very often a product of over-resting. Just plant decadence of plants becoming, so rank and stemmy that it's shading the crown buds, and so you're not getting new tillering. And then if that plant material stands there too long up in the air, it oxidizes and it won't get eaten. Bugs don't chew on it anymore, and it just stands there as an obstruction. So most of that, those are the two big effects of excessive recovery period from a biological sense, but there's also a financial ramification. Those are potential regrowth days that you're not capturing, and so you are not getting as much green feed quality production in a year as if you were managing it at a, I hesitate to use the word perfect, but a really optimal recovery period. Because if you look at the number of days in a growing season, and when we overrest, sometimes I'll call this the stale solar panel. We get to the point where we have a lot of biomass standing out there, but we are not adding new biomass. And that's a stale solar panel. And every day that we're sitting there with a stale solar panel, we're not creating new feed to run more livestock. And we keep coming back to running more livestock is what drives your revenue flow up. So there's biological and financial ramifications of over-resting. Yes?
So then how do you determine when it is time to go on or move on to that?
No, I had water.
So you don't
Oh, thank you.
have a
Okay, I bet we're coming to that.
Okay.
Okay. All right, critical to adjust that recovery period. All right, so is it 20 days, 40 days, or 100 days? Come on, every time I say something like that, you're supposed to say,
It depends.
it depends. All right, click it. All right, so I can still screw up a pasture, as bad as anyone in any given year. I sometimes I've been doing this a long time. I still sometimes make bad choices and put myself into undesirable positions. I did this several years ago because I was trying to predict the weather based on last year's weather. And if I have learned one thing in my life is you can't predict next year's weather based on this year's weather. The only thing you say is it's going to be different. So I had missed grazing. So I had 450 acres under center pivot. And this one year, I started my grazing and stocking very conservatively because the year before, man, did I get hammered for getting out on it too early and running out, being overstocked. And oh yeah, that's all right. I already mentioned the year of 318 AUDs per acre. That was 2009. 2009 is the year that the wolf packs in Idaho really started flourishing. So the ranch that I was managing one unit of, all told, ran about 1,400 cows. 600 some of those usually went up to public land grazing permit in the national forest. In 2009, we lost 25 calves to wolves up there. And that's a pretty good financial hit. We were making some steady progress in how many cows we could carry at the Patterson unit on the irrigated pasture. And Troy, the overall ranch manager, decided in 2010, we're not sending in any cows to the mountains because we can't take that wolf loss. And he asked, and I'd been running about 425 cows at Patterson. And he said, how many cows can you run at Patterson? Because I'm not going to the mountain. And I said, 600. And so that 2009 just gave me a lot of overconfidence because we had made such a big jump in what we were doing. And I just expected 2010 we'd take another jump like that. Well, 2010, it was still snowing on the 1st of June. And I do a pasture inventory thing every 2 weeks. Well, I know what I have for feed supply, and my inventory said it was too early to take cows. You can't take cows. Troy said, we're just about out of hay down here. When can you take cows? And I said, send them up. And I'm glad he didn't send, I ran 550 cows in 2010, 550 pairs. I'm glad he didn't send 600 because 550 was too many in that year. All right. So I got my butt kicked that year. 2011 comes, and it's looking like it's going to be just like 2010. And so this time I put my foot down and said, no, I'm not taking any cows till June 1st. Our average cows coming up date was between May 10th and 13th. And I said, I can't take any cows till June 1st. The weather was kind of bad till about May 25th. I didn't have any cows yet. And it just turned around and suddenly became a fabulous year. They sent up 300 cows on the 1st of June, and I could already start to see the grass growing away from me. And they sent me another 200 about the 10th of June. So I had 500 pairs there in 2011, but that grass got such a jump on me because I was hesitant about bringing them on because, you know, it was looking like it was going to be bad, and I got scared. I didn't want to get spanked 2 years in a row. And so they came up and ended up by July, the end of July, out of that 450 irrigated acres, I had 120 acres I hadn't touched. I mean, it's all headed out, browning out, even under irrigation. If a grass stand goes to, you know, a mature point, even with irrigation, you don't grow very much green feed back in that. You've got to get that cover off. So on August 1st, this is the edge between what I had grazed earlier and allowed to recover to a proper stage and what the untouched stuff looked like. And so this had recovered, in essence, all of June and July, and it had started growing some in May. So that's about 75, 80 days growth there. That's way too long a recovery. This is about 30 days of recovery right here. And that 30 days of recovery, that's grass-fed beef, quality. That is quality finished feed. If you were in a dairy, you'd love to graze that stuff because it'll make milk. And so we're faced with this choice of, do we go back and start regrazing this stuff, or do we grind through this 120 acres of rank feed? Troy and I talked about, and you might say, well, why didn't you bale it off for hay? There's something we have called rocks. And I suspect you folks might have some rocks in some of your fields. And if you try to run hay equipment, I mean, it's lovely in that. You can't see rocks because it's covered up in the grass, but the swather sure finds them. They had cut some hay there up till in 2009, cut some hay off there because we had so much grass. And but after Troy said, I'm never bringing a piece of haying equipment to Patterson again. So that was off the table for us. You know, in a lot of situations, you'd have corrected this problem by going in and cutting it for hay, says the guy who wrote Kick the Hay Habit. So that there are alternatives, but the point is, how much recovery time does it take? All right, so we think in terms of biological time, not calendar days, and what that translates to. This is one of kind of the oldest, one of the first guidelines of rotational grazing I ever heard. Fast growth, fast rotation, slow growth, slow rotation. So when plants are growing very fast, you move them more quickly. It doesn't take as many days for recovery. All right, so how do we know when a pasture is ready to begin grazing? It is not a matter of how tall it is how many leaves per tiller are out there. So let's advance another one. Okay, so most of you have probably heard the phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 terminology. If you haven't, phase 1 of growth is when we have limited leaf area and it's a very slow growth rate. And then we get enough leaves out there that photosynthesis accelerates and growth takes a fast turn upward. And then phase 3 is when we have a big mass of plants out there. Upper part of the plant is shading the lower leaves, so they're losing effectiveness. Growth rate slows down. So phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. You can correlate those phases to the number of leaves on a tiller. And so when we talk about leaf stage, we are counting fully emerged leaves. 1, 2, Now here's one that's partially out, so we call that 2.5 leaf stage. 1, 2, 3, another one coming up. This is 3 leaf stage. The transition between a negative carbohydrate balance and a positive carbohydrate balance is generally taking place right in here. In phase 1, we are in a negative carbohydrate balance. In phase 2, rising up to more leaves. I think we've got 4 out here on this one. And to phase 3, from here on out, we're in a positive carbohydrate balance. The minimum number of leaves you want on a tiller of a cool season grass to safely graze it is 3, because you are into a positive carbohydrate balance. But if you graze it at this point, you're going to push it immediately back into a negative, which is another reason why we want a very short grazing period. And these are just, those ones have water, these ones don't. Okay. We've already defined what this is, but what we haven't said yet, so I have emphasized 3 leaves on a cool season grass. When we're looking at the native warm season grasses, big blue stem, Indian grass, switchgrass, things like that, we want to be at least 5 leaves. Okay? Now my preference for grazing is on cool seasons is 4 to 5 leaves per tiller. 3, you're in a positive carbohydrate balance, but not very much. So what I am looking at is 4 to 5 leaves. On the native grasses, I like 6 to 8. Yeah, he's making the point that with perennial ryegrass, 3 leaves is basically, 3 green leaves is all you're ever going to have on that. And that is why if you look at all the New Zealand, the English, the Irish recommendations on grazing perennial ryegrass, they're all very short recovery periods because 3 leaves is all you get. If you want to grow a mixed pasture that contains perennial ryegrass, white clover is generally what it is, because it's the only legume that can withstand the frequency of grazing that perennial ryegrass functions at. Fescue, orchard grass, brome grass, timothy, meadow brome, those ones will all go to more than 3 leaves. So perennial ryegrass is kind of a unique grass. It's like in the warm seasons, Bermuda grass is a unique grass. When we look at the native warm season grasses, there are none of them that thrive with set stocking. They all pretty well demand a recovery period, during the active growing season. And so some parts of the country, if I do not put that native in front of it and say native warm season grasses, and I just say warm season grasses, if I'm in a Bermuda grass neighborhood, they'll call BS on me and say, no, it doesn't need a recovery period. Oh yeah, Bermuda grass doesn't. There's 3 really unique plants in the forage area that violate all the rules that we have for everything else. Those are alfalfa, because alfalfa does regrow entirely based on stored carbohydrates in the taproot and from crown buds. It doesn't matter if you leave 5 inches or 1 inch on alfalfa grazing or cutting it for hay, it's going to grow back, at the same pace. So alfalfa is an exception to most of the rules. Bermuda grass is an exception to most of the rules, and perennial ryegrass is the 3rd one. So if you have those as your primary forages, we put you in the special needs case. All right, so now to your point of, well, how long does it actually need to be? We've defined it that it's a biological thing, that it's the number of leaves. So here's what's going to determine what the calendar days are going to be. If we are in our peak growing time, so for a year with fescue-based pastures, orchard grass, stuff like that, we're probably talking, what, 10th of May to 10th of June? Would that catch the peak of the season? Or is it a little earlier than that? Good enough? Okay, just trust me.
Altitude.
Okay. Oh, yeah, and altitude. Not your attitude, but your altitude. Okay, yeah. So, but at peak growth, a grass plant will put a new leaf out about every 5 to 7 days. So if your target is to graze when it has 4 new leaves, it's going to be a recovery period somewhere between 20 and 28 days, right? A leaf every 5 to 7 days, 4 leaves, boom, 20 to 28 days, and your plants are recovered. Your grass plants, okay. Middle of the season, now we're, we've passed 4th of July, things are really slowed down some. That leaf might come every 10 to 15 days. So again, for leaf stage, our recovery period is going to be 40 to 60 days. Late in the season, really slow growth, might be 3 to 4 weeks to get a leaf. And so that says, can I even do the math? 12 to 16 weeks? How many days is that? 80 to some big number. This is kind of a drought scenario in this part of the world. I doubt if you actually get to a point other than in a drought where it might take that long. A lot of your season is probably going to be in this range here. And so that says 40 to 60 days, 20 to 25, 28 in the first cycle maybe, leading into the second cycle, but then it's going to stretch out to 40 to 60 days. And on the warm season grasses, if we want to be grazing at 6 or 7 leaves, that would be at 6 leaves going to be 30 to 42 days. And this is going to be 60 to 90 days. So that's how you actually figure out what the recovery period needs to be. And believe it or not, if you're interested, anybody can go out there and pluck 10 tillers, go to a pasture, pluck 10 tillers out this week, do it again next week, and the following week, and you can figure out on your own place at any time of the year how many days is it taking to get a new leaf out. Because you just count the total number of leaves on your 10 tillers, divide it by 10, that's your leaf stage. Next week you do it again, and maybe you've moved from 2.7 to 3.6 over the course, of a week.
If you were doing what you described in the exact same pasture using like a grazing stick, how different do you think that would be telling you how much was out there, or like when to do?
The grazing stick. One of the bane of my lives. When we're younger in our lives, sometimes we think we're really onto something and it's great and good, and then life progresses and you're embarrassed about what you once said or thought in your life. I don't know if you've ever had that experience. That's the grazing stick for me. The grazing stick was invented in Missouri, and on the original grazing sticks, all of those yield per acre inch stuff, that's from, our research at the Forage Systems Research Center. And yeah, I've taught a lot of people.
I didn't realize that when I asked the question.
I've taught a lot of people over the years how to use the grazing stick, and come to the sad realization that, well, it's only as good as the information upon which it is based, and it's only as good as the person who's using it understanding how it's supposed to be used. I do not encourage people to use grazing sticks because they probably have a standard error of 40%. And if you have a standard error of 40%, you just as well stop a passerby on the road and say, hey, come out here and tell me how much feed I have. All right, having said that, what we train people to do now is calibrate your eye. statistically, the trained eye, and any one of you can do this in 30 days, train your eye to visualize how much feed is out there, and be statistically as accurate as any tool we use in research for measuring forage yield. The New Zealanders showed this way back in the 1970s. You know, I had to reprove it to myself in the 1990s, and now it's pretty well the only thing that I do is visual assessments. And when we go to the pasture this afternoon, I'm going to show you how you do that. And we'll start that process. Okay, let's go. So out west, you're not out west, but because we're less than 10 inches of precipitation, a lot of our grasses, it takes a year to grow 3 leaves. I mean, that's all that you get on a tiller. And most of our pastures get grazed once a year, but there's a percentage of them that have no use at all in any given year. Usually about 20 to 30% of our rangeland does not get any use at all. And 13 to 15 months recovery is what we're generally operating on out there. Okay, so this figure here, we have number of paddocks within the pasture here, the percent of days in the growing season that any pasture is in recovery mode. If you have one pasture, you have 0 recovery opportunity. You have 2 pastures, you have 50%, and it goes on out here. So this is the response curve of percent days recovery relative to the number of pastures we have to work with. And you can see 90% of recovery benefit is accomplished with 10 paddocks. So people ask the question, why do you subdivide any more than 10 paddocks? You know, with 10 paddocks, you might, if you were looking at a 40-day recovery period, you would be basically 4 days on a pasture, off for 36. Oh, I guess we need 11 pastures, don't we? Because you always have to account for the one you're in. But the length of our grazing period with 10 pastures might be 4 days. If we come way out here to where we need this 36, 40-day recovery period, we move them every day through 40 pastures. We gain a little bit more in recovery, but is it worth it? Probably not. All right, the reason we subdivide to more than just that minimum number to get a recovery benefit is because we have a whole lot of other beneficial things that happen as we shorten the grazing period, that uniform grazing distribution, manure distribution, all those things there and much more. Give me a click, please. And all of those things together translate to increasing carrying capacity. So effectively managing time will allow you to increase carrying capacity so that you can increase stocking rate, which increases revenue flow, raises the possibility of profit. That's the word I was looking for. Yeah, profit. Okay, so the way I like people to think about it, when you take a property and you start splitting it up, don't think about it just in terms of the area that you're doing. Think about it as the time increments that you are creating. And so a lot of places, you know, that I visit, you know, they have a pasture or a part of the farm that, I wonder what I was going to say. Oh, it's more productive than other parts. And so if you had 100 acres and you wanted 20 pastures, do you want to make 20 5-acre pastures? Probably not. What you want to make is 20 pastures, each of which will allow you 2 to 3 days of grazing in there. And in the less productive part of the farm, that might be 10 acres. On more productive, places it might be 3. So rather than creating equal area pastures, I encourage you to create equal time pastures, because that's what you want to base it on. Is, let's have one more, and that is, it's about managing both space and time. And it's better to have an optimal time of grazing with variable space than it is to have fixed space and then try to vary the time that you're there. All right, there is my contact information. I am doing my best to be retired by February when I turn 70, so I don't know why I'm giving you contact information. That seems self-defeating. Let's have one more click there, please. I didn't bring any books to sell, but I got to have a commercial here at the end. So again, there's our website. Those are the books that I've written. We sell a lot of other things too, but there it is.